The stars had watched countless species rise and fall. The galaxy was old and it had rules. The strong ruled, the weak served, and those who refused to accept their place were simply erased from existence. The galactic hegemony had enforced these rules for 10,000 years. 12 elder species sat at the top of civilization, their fleets so vast that they blotted out the light of suns. They had crushed rebellions, absorbed empires, and turned entire worlds into dust. No one challenged them. No one dared. Then humanity reached the stars. At first, the hegemony paid little attention to the small blue world called Earth. Humans were primitive creatures, barely capable of leaving their own solar system. Their ships were slow and fragile. Their weapons were laughable. They were insects trying to crawl into a garden of giants. But insects could be annoying, and these particular insects refused to show proper respect. Ambassador of the species was the first to deal with the human problem. They were the oldest and most powerful members of the hegemony. They stood 8 feet tall, with skin like polished stone and eyes that glowed with cold intelligence. Had personally overseen the extinction of 6 species during his long career. Humans, he believed, would be the 7th. He summoned Earth's representative to his ship, a massive vessel called the Eternal Judgment. The human who came was a woman named. She was small, with dark hair and calm eyes. She showed no fear as she stood before and the assembled leaders of 12 species. "You have expanded beyond your permitted boundaries," said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You have refused to pay tribute. You have rejected our generous offer of protection. This is your final chance. Submit to the hegemony or face the consequences." Looked at the gathered aliens. Some were massive, covered in scales and armor. Others were elegant, with flowing robes and ancient faces. All of them looked at her like she was already dead. She smiled. "Humanity does not kneel," she said. "Not to kings, not to gods, and certainly not to you." Felt something he had not experienced in centuries. It took him a moment to recognize it as surprise. No species had ever refused the ultimatum. Not once in 10,000 years. "Then you have chosen extinction," he said. Smile did not waver. "We have chosen to be human." The cleansing fleet arrived at Earth 3 months later. 4,000 warships surrounded the blue planet. Humanity had gathered everything they had to defend their home. 87 vessels, old ships built for exploration rather than war. Their crews knew they were going to die. They flew out anyway. The battle lasted 4 hours. Human ships burned like candles against the darkness of space. They fought with desperate courage, ramming enemy vessels when their weapons failed, broadcasting defiant messages even as their hulls broke apart. They destroyed 43 hegemony ships before the last human fighter went silent. Then the cleansing fleet turned its weapons on Earth. They did not invade. They did not negotiate. They simply fired. Orbital stations vanished in balls of fire. Cities burned. Oceans boiled. The planet that had given birth to humanity was transformed into a tomb of ash and glass. But the hegemony was thorough. They knew that humans had spread to other worlds. Small colonies on Mars, research stations on the moons of Jupiter, mining outposts in the asteroid belt. The cleansing fleet hunted them all. For 2 years, the killing continued. Human colony ships were tracked and destroyed. Outposts were bombed into craters. Refugees who tried to flee into deep space were followed and eliminated. The hegemony wanted more than victory. They wanted to erase humanity from the memory of the galaxy. Ambassador personally watched the destruction of the last known human settlement, a small mining station on a frozen moon called Europa. As the ice cracked and the station collapsed into the dark ocean below, he felt satisfied. The human problem was solved. The galaxy returned to its normal order. The hegemony continued its ancient rule. Other species watched and learned the lesson. Resistance was not just futile, it was fatal. Years passed, then decades. Occasionally, a hegemony patrol would report strange signals from the outer reaches of human space. Faint energy readings near gas giants, unexplained heat signatures in asteroid fields. But when they investigated, they found nothing. Just rocks and ice and empty void. The reports were dismissed. Sensor ghosts, they said, echoes of the dead. 50 years after the burning, a young officer named asked his commander about the extinct species. He had found old records of the final battle, images of tiny human ships flying against impossible odds. Why did they fight? Asked. They knew they could not win, it was illogical. His commander, an old veteran who had participated in the cleansing, thought for a long moment before answering. Because they were human, he said. They were a strange species. They did not think like us. They valued things we do not understand, freedom, pride, something they called hope. He made a sound that might have been a laugh. Foolish creatures, hope did not save them. But deep beneath the frozen surface of Europa, in tunnels that went miles below the ocean floor, lights still flickered, machines still hummed, and children still learned the stories of Earth. The hegemony had been thorough, but they had not been thorough enough. In the weeks before the burning, humanity had made a desperate choice. They could not save everyone, they could not save most, but they could save some. Hidden bases had been prepared in the places no one would think to look, the cores of asteroids, the storms of gas giants, the deep ice of frozen moons. 12,000 humans had vanished into the darkness while their world burned. They watched their planet die. They listened to the final screams of billions, and they made a promise. They would survive, they would remember, and one day when the galaxy had forgotten them completely, they would return. In the hidden stations, children grew up hearing the same words every night. Their parents whispered it. Their teachers taught it. It was written on the walls of every corridor and carved into every bulkhead. We are not gone, we are not forgot, we are waiting. The galaxy expected silence from humanity. And for 50 years, that was exactly what humanity gave them. But silence can be a weapon too, and humanity had learned to be very, very patient, was born in the darkness. Her first memories were of metal walls and recycled air, of dim lights and the constant hum of machines. She had never seen a sunset. She had never felt rain on her face. She had never walked under an open sky. But she knew exactly what all those things looked like because her grandmother had described them 1,000 times. Earth was beautiful, her grandmother would say, her old eyes looking at something far away. The sky changed colors when the sun went down. Orange and pink and purple all mixed together like paint. And the rain, little one, the rain smelled like life itself. Was part of the ghost generation. That was what they called the children born in hiding. They were ghosts because the galaxy believed they did not exist. They lived in secret stations buried in ice, hollowed into asteroids, or hidden in the eternal storms of gas giants. They never sent signals. They never showed themselves. They were the children of the dead. But they were not dead, and they were not idle. The station where grew up was called Haven 7. It was built inside a massive asteroid in the outer reaches of the solar system. 2,000 people lived there, working every day toward a single purpose. They called it the Great Work. When was 6 years old, her teacher took her class to the observation window. Below them, in a cavern so large it could have held a city, she saw her first warship being built. It was only a skeleton then, a framework of metal beams and cables. Workers in suits crawled over it like ants. Sparks flew as welders joined plates of armor. Machines lowered massive engines into place. The ship was bigger than anything had ever imagined. This is why we survive, her teacher said. This is why we hide. One day this ship and thousands like it will carry us home. Never forgot that moment. She decided then what she would become. Not a farmer growing food in the hydroponic bays, not an engineer building ships. She would fly them. She would command them. She would take them home. The years passed slowly in the hidden stations. Life was hard. Resources were limited. Every drop of water was recycled. Every scrap of metal was precious. People worked long hours and slept in small rooms. There was no luxury, no comfort, no rest. But there was purpose, and purpose made everything bearable. The engineers were the heroes of the Ghost generation. They took broken pieces of hegemony technology, salvaged from destroyed ships and abandoned outposts, and they learned their secrets. They figured out how alien engines worked. They decoded enemy weapons. They improved everything they touched. Human scientists had always been creative. Now, driven by survival and fury, they became something more. They invented new alloys stronger than anything the hegemony had. They designed weapons that could crack enemy shields. They built engines that were faster, more efficient, and more reliable than their alien counterparts. The hegemony had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. In that time, they had grown comfortable. They stopped innovating. They stopped improving. Why bother when no one could challenge them? Humanity did not have that luxury. Every year, their technology grew better. Every year, their fleet grew larger. Fleet Admiral Wei oversaw the entire operation. He was one of the oldest survivors, a man who had been 44 years old during the burning. He had commanded one of the last ships to escape Earth, a cargo vessel that had carried 300 refugees into the darkness. Now he was 94, his hair white and his body frail, but his mind was sharp and his will was iron. He had dedicated 50 years to one goal: revenge. No, not revenge, justice. Revenge is personal, he told Young when she became an officer at age 22. Justice is something bigger. We are not doing this because we hate them. We are doing this because what they did was wrong, and wrong must be answered. By the time was 30, the fleet was almost complete. 2,000 warships of various sizes, from small fighters to massive dreadnoughts. They were painted black, designed to be invisible against the darkness of space. They carried weapons that would make the hegemony weep. At the heart of the fleet was the flagship. They called it the Remembrance. The Remembrance was built from the wreckage of human history. Its hull contained metal from the destroyed orbital stations of Earth. Its bridge was constructed around the salvaged core of the last ship to fall during the burning. The names of every human who died in the genocide were engraved on its inner walls. 11 billion names, written in letters so small they could barely be seen. The ship was a tomb, and it was a weapon, and it was a promise. Was chosen to command it. She was 42 years old when she received the news. Admiral Wei called her to his quarters, a small room decorated with pictures of Earth, blue oceans, green forests, white clouds against a pale sky, things he had seen and she never had. "You will lead them home," he said, his voice weak but steady. "I am too old to go. I will watch from here, but you will finish what we started." Felt the weight of generations settling on her shoulders. 12,000 survivors had become 200,000. All of them had worked for this moment. All of them had sacrificed. Parents had died without seeing their children's children. Engineers had worked until their hands bled. Soldiers had trained until they dropped. All for this, all for her to lead them home. "I will not fail them," she said. Admiral Wei smiled. It was the smile of a man who had waited 50 years to see his dream take shape. "I know," he said, "that is why I chose you." The preparations took 3 more years. Ships were tested, crews were trained, plans were made and remade. Nothing could be left to chance. They would have one opportunity. If they failed, there would be no second chance. Humanity would truly die. On the 50th anniversary of the burning, the fleet gathered in the darkness between planets. 2,000 ships, arranged in perfect formation. Inside them, 200,000 humans waited. Soldiers and pilots, engineers and medics. Children who had grown up on stories of Earth and elders who remembered it. Admiral Wei's face appeared on every screen. He was in the medical bay now, too weak to stand, but his eyes were bright and his voice was strong. 50 years ago they took everything from us, he said. Our world, our families, our future. They thought they had destroyed us. They called us extinct. They forgot about us and moved on with their lives. He paused, and something like joy crossed his weathered face. Today we remind them. Today we show the galaxy that humanity does not die. We do not surrender. We do not disappear. We survive. We endure. We return. The old admiral raised his frail hand, in a gesture that humans had used for centuries. Go now, take back our place among the stars, and show them what silence really sounds like when it ends. Across 2,000 ships, engines roared to life. The ghost generation was done hiding. The children of Earth were going home. And the galaxy was not ready for what was coming. High Arbiter of the was having an ordinary day. He sat in the great council chamber of the hegemony, listening to reports about trade disputes and border conflicts. Small problems, boring problems, the kind of problems that came from ruling a peaceful galaxy where no one dared to challenge the established order. Was old even by standards. He had been a young officer during the human extinction, and he remembered it with pride. It had been his mentor who had given the order to burn Earth, had watched from his ship as the blue planet turned black. It had been his greatest honor to serve during those days. That was 50 years ago. The humans were forgotten. Life had moved on. Then his aide rushed into the chamber. The young was shaking. His stone-like skin had turned pale. He looked like he had seen something impossible. High Arbiter, the aide gasped. We are receiving reports from the outer systems. There are signals. Felt annoyed. What kind of signals? Speak clearly. Human signals, High Arbiter, thousands of them. The entire council chamber went silent. Every species, every representative, every guard stopped moving. Human signals were impossible. Humans were dead. Humans had been dead for 50 years. You are mistaken, said. Run the scans again. We have High Arbiter 20 times. The signals are real and they are moving. Before could respond, the main display screen at the center of the chamber flickered. Static filled the image, then cleared to show something that made the High Arbiter's ancient heart stop. Ships, human ships, more ships than had ever seen in one place. They emerged from the asteroid fields of the outer solar system like shadows coming to life. Black hulls against the darkness of space, barely visible except for the glow of their engines. They moved in perfect formation, thousands of vessels arranged in patterns that spoke of decades of planning. Small fighters flew in protective screens around larger cruisers. Destroyers formed precise lines on the flanks. Carriers released clouds of smaller craft that swarmed like angry insects. And at the center of it all, something massive. Something so large it seemed to bend space around it. The Remembrance, the flagship of humanity's ghost fleet. Could not speak, he could not think. This was not possible. The humans had been thoroughly exterminated. He had watched them die. He had confirmed their extinction himself. The screen flickered again, and a human face appeared. A woman with dark hair and cold eyes. She wore a uniform that was simple and functional, without decoration or medals. But there was something in her expression that made feel very small. My name is Admiral of the Earth Commonwealth Fleet, the woman said. Her voice was calm, almost pleasant, but underneath the calm was something harder than steel. 50 years ago you came to our world. You gave us a choice, kneel or die. We chose neither. You burned our planet. You killed our families. You hunted our survivors. You declared us extinct and forgot we ever existed. She paused, and the faintest smile crossed her face. You should not have forgotten. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Species that had not shown fear were screaming for information. How many ships? Where did they come from? How was this possible? Forced himself to think. The hegemony still had superior numbers. They still had more ships, more soldiers, more resources. This human fleet was impressive, but it could be defeated. It had to be defeated. Send the message to all hegemony forces, he ordered. Maximum alert. All ships to engage immediately. Destroy these ghosts before they spread their infection. But even as he gave the command, he noticed something strange. The hegemony representatives around him were not moving with confidence. They were hesitating. Some were backing away from the screens. Others were already calling for their personal transports. They were afraid. For the first time in 10,000 years, the masters of the galaxy were afraid. Admiral continued her transmission. You thought you knew what humans were capable of. You thought we were weak because we were young. You thought you could crush us because we were small. You were wrong. Behind her, through the bridge windows, the fleet stretched out like an ocean of steel and fire. 2,000 ships, built in secret, crewed by the children of the dead. We have spent 50 years preparing for this moment. 50 years hiding in the places you never thought to look. 50 years building, training, and waiting. Your technology is ancient. Your tactics are predictable. Your confidence is weakness dressed as strength. She leaned forward, and her eyes seemed to look directly at himself. We are coming for you, not for revenge. Revenge is too small a word for what you took from us. We are coming because you taught us what the galaxy truly is. Cruel, merciless. A place where the weak are destroyed and the strong take what they want. Her voice hardened. You made us into this. You burned away our innocence and left only iron. You wanted monsters. Congratulations. You created the worst monsters the galaxy has ever seen. The transmission ended. Across the hegemony, panic spread like fire through dry grass. Species that had ruled for suddenly realized that their power was not absolute. Their fleets, which had seemed invincible, now looked small against the tide of black ships emerging from human space. Military commanders demanded reinforcements. Politicians demanded explanations. Civilians demanded protection. The hegemony, which had operated with cold efficiency for 10,000 years, was suddenly drowning in chaos. And the human fleet kept coming. They did not rush. They did not hurry. They moved with the patience of people who had waited 50 years and could wait a few more days. Every jump, every formation change, every movement was calculated and precise. Watched the tactical displays with growing horror. The human ships were not just numerous. They were advanced. Their engines were faster than anything the hegemony possessed. Their weapons had ranges that should have been impossible. Their shields deflected shots that should have destroyed them. 50 years, he thought. What had the humans done in 50 years of darkness and silence? They had evolved. They had transformed. They had taken their grief and their rage and their desperation, and they had turned it all into power. The first hegemony patrol to engage the human fleet was destroyed in minutes. 12 ships against 50. The patrol commander sent one final message before his vessel exploded. They fight like nothing we have ever seen. They fight like they have nothing to lose. Understood then. He understood what made humans truly dangerous. It was not their ships or their weapons or their tactics. It was their souls. They had been broken and burned and left for dead. They had lost everything, and people who had lost everything were capable of anything. The hegemony had expected silence from humanity. They had expected the quiet of extinction, the peace of a problem solved. Instead, they got a roar. And it was only the beginning. The Battle of Prime would be remembered for 10,000 years. The hegemony had gathered everything they had. 6,000 warships from 12 species, assembled around the home world of the. It was the largest fleet in galactic history, a wall of metal and firepower that should have been unstoppable. High Arbiter stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, the most powerful ship ever built by the hegemony. He had commanded this vessel for 40 years. It had never lost a battle. It had never even been damaged. Today, he watched the human fleet approach. 2,000 ships against 6,000. The numbers favored the hegemony. The experience favored the hegemony. Every calculation, every prediction, every model said the hegemony would win, but could not shake the cold feeling in his chest. Admiral sat in her command chair on the Remembrance, watching the same tactical displays. Her crew moved with quiet efficiency around her. No one spoke unless necessary. No one showed fear. They had trained for this moment their entire lives. "Enemy fleet is in position," her tactical officer reported. "They outnumber us 3-1. Nodded. "Good. They will be overconfident." She opened a channel to the entire fleet. 200,000 humans heard her voice in that moment, from the smallest fighter pilot to the commanders of the massive dreadnoughts. "You know why we are here," she said. "You know what they took from us. Today we take it back. Not our world, that is gone, but our place in this galaxy, our right to exist, our future." She paused. "Fight for your parents, who hid you in the darkness so you could live. Fight for your grandparents who burned with Earth. Fight for every human who ever looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. Today, we give them their answer." Her voice hardened into iron. "All ships engage." The battle began. Human tactics were unlike anything the hegemony had ever faced. Their ships did not form neat lines or predictable patterns. They moved like water, flowing around obstacles, filling gaps, always changing. Small groups of human vessels would appear to retreat, drawing enemy ships forward, then turn and attack from unexpected angles. The hegemony commanders tried to respond, but they were too slow. Their communication was too rigid. By the time orders reached their ships, the humans had already changed tactics 3 times. On the first day, the humans lost 200 ships. The hegemony lost 500. Could not understand what he was seeing. Human ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting. Vessels with broken engines rammed into enemy cruisers. Pilots who had lost all weapons flew their fighters directly into enemy bridges. They did not surrender. They did not retreat. They fought until there was nothing left to fight with. "They are insane," one of his officers whispered. "No," said slowly. "They are human. This is how they survive. This is how they have always survived." By the third day, the hegemony had lost 1,000 ships. Their formations were breaking apart. Species that had fought together were now arguing with each other, blaming each other for failures, refusing to follow orders they thought were suicidal. The humans pressed their advantage. Admiral directed the battle from the Remembrance like a conductor leading an orchestra. She saw patterns in the chaos that her enemies could not see. She anticipated their moves before they made them. She found weaknesses they did not know they had. On the fourth day, she saw her opportunity. The Eternal Dominion's flagship had moved forward to rally the failing hegemony forces. It was surrounded by a protective fleet of smaller ships, but there was a gap. A small gap, open for only a few minutes, where a coordinated attack could reach the vessel. "Strike Group 7, ordered. Execute pattern Remembrance." 12 human destroyers had been floating dead in space for hours, their crews pretending to be killed. Now they came alive. Engines flared. Weapons powered up. They shot through the gap in the enemy formation like arrows, heading straight for the Eternal Dominion. Saw them coming. He ordered evasive action. He called for support, but it was too late. The 12 destroyers hit the Eternal Dominion from all sides at once. Their weapons, designed by human engineers who had spent 50 years perfecting the art of destruction, tore through shields that had never been broken. They cut through armor that had been called invincible. The greatest ship of the hegemony split in half. Was thrown from his command chair. Alarms screamed. Fires erupted. Through a crack in the hull he could see the stars, and among them the black shapes of human ships, still fighting, still advancing. He was rescued by an escape pod moments before the Eternal Dominion exploded. As medical officers treated his wounds, He watched the battle continue on a small display screen. It was no longer a battle, it was a collapse. The destruction of the flagship broke something in the hegemony fleet. Species that had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years suddenly realized they could lose. They could die. They could be defeated by creatures they had tried to exterminate. Ships began to flee. First in ones and twos, then in dozens, then in hundreds. The great alliance that had controlled the galaxy shattered like glass. Each species ran for its own territory, abandoning their allies, thinking only of survival. The humans let them go. They did not chase the fleeing ships. They did not fire on vessels that were retreating. They simply held their position and watched as the greatest military force in galactic history fell apart. On the sixth day, the last hegemony vessel surrendered. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Remembrance, looking out at the debris field that had once been the most powerful fleet in existence. Her ship was damaged. Her fleet had lost 800 vessels. 40,000 humans had died in the battle. But they had won. Her communications officer approached. "Admiral, we are receiving surrender signals from Prime. The planetary government is requesting terms." Nodded. She felt tired. 50 years of preparation, 6 days of battle, and now it was over. But she did not feel joy. She did not feel triumph. She felt only the weight of all those names engraved on the walls of her ship. "Tell them we will speak tomorrow," she said. "Tonight we remember our dead." Across the fleet, humans gathered in small groups. They spoke the names of those who had fallen. They shared stories of their courage. They wept for friends and family who would never see the victory they had given their lives to achieve. Admiral Wei watched the reports from his medical bed in Haven 7. Tears ran down his old face, but he was smiling. He had lived long enough to see it. The ghosts had proven they were real. The children of Earth had reclaimed their place among the stars. The galaxy had expected silence. Instead, it got the loudest answer in history. The Great Hall of Prime had stood for 12,000 years. Its walls were carved from a single piece of crystal that had taken a century to grow. Its ceiling was so high that clouds sometimes formed beneath it. The floor was made of stone brought from 100 conquered worlds, each piece a reminder of dominance. For 10,000 years, this hall had been the heart of the hegemony. Here, the 12 elder species had made their laws. Here, they had decided which civilizations would live and which would die. Here, they had ordered the destruction of Earth. Now Admiral walked across that floor, her boots echoing in the silence. The representatives of the 12 species sat in their ancient seats, arranged in a circle around a central platform. They looked smaller than she had imagined. Without their fleets, without their power, they were just frightened creatures waiting to learn their fate. High Arbiter was among them. His injuries from the battle had healed, but something in his eyes had not. He looked at the way a man looks at a natural disaster, not with hatred, with the understanding that he was facing something beyond his control. Stepped onto the central platform. Behind her, through the great windows of the hall, the Remembrance was visible in orbit, a reminder of what had happened, a warning of what could happen again. 50 years ago, she began, a woman named stood in a room like this. She told you that humanity does not kneel. You killed her for it. You killed 11 billion people for it. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. That made it worse. I grew up in a tunnel beneath the ice of a moon that had no name. I never saw a sunset until I was 32 years old. I never touched grass or felt wind or swam in an ocean. Everything I know about Earth, I learned from stories, from memories passed down by people who had lost everything. She looked at each species in turn. The Morn, all of them had participated in the genocide. All of them had watched humanity burn and done nothing. You expected us to die quietly. When we did not die, you expected us to come for revenge. You expected us to burn your worlds as you burned ours, to kill your children as you killed ours. Spoke, his voice rough. We are prepared to accept whatever punishment you demand. Our crimes were great. We understand this now. Was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. The iron was still there, but something else was mixed with it, something softer. My grandmother was one of the survivors of the burning. She lost her husband, her parents, her 3 sisters, and her home in a single day. She spent the rest of her life in a metal box beneath the ice, raising children who would never see the world she loved. She paused. Every night she told me stories about Earth, about the good things, the beauty, the kindness, the way strangers would help each other after disasters, the way people would sacrifice for those they had never met. She told me that being human meant more than just surviving. It meant building something worth surviving for. Reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a flower, pressed and preserved, brown with age. She held it up so everyone could see. She gave me this before she died. It was from her garden on Earth, the last piece of our world. She told me to remember what we were fighting for, not revenge, not hatred, something better. The representatives looked confused. They had expected anger. They had expected demands for blood. They had not expected this. I could destroy you, said simply. Our fleet is damaged, but it is strong enough. I could burn Prime as you burned Earth. I could hunt your survivors as you hunted ours. I could make you feel exactly what we felt. Her eyes met. But I will not, because if I did, I would become exactly what you are. And my grandmother did not spend her life in darkness so that I could become a monster. She placed the flower on the platform in front of her. The hegemony is finished. Your empire of fear and domination is over. But we are not here to replace one tyranny with another. We are here to build something new. Straightened, and her voice carried to every corner of the ancient hall. There will be a commonwealth. Every species, from the oldest to the youngest, will have a voice. There will be no rulers and subjects, no masters and slaves. There will be equals working together, sharing the galaxy that belongs to all of us. Murmurs spread through the representatives. Some looked suspicious, others looked hopeful, a few looked ashamed. You will answer for your crimes, continued. Not with blood, but with labor. You will help us rebuild. You will help us create the galaxy that should have existed all along. And in time, perhaps, there will be forgiveness. Not because you deserve it, but because holding on to hatred is a prison, and we have been in prison long enough. She looked at the flower on the platform, a small thing, a dead thing, but still beautiful somehow. Earth is gone. We cannot bring it back, but we can plant new seeds. We can grow new gardens. We can make sure that what happened to us never happens to anyone else. Rose slowly from his seat. For a moment it seemed like he might argue, might resist. Instead, he lowered his head. We accept your terms, he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. And we are sorry. That word is not enough. Nothing is enough, but it is all we have. Nodded, then we begin. Far away, in Haven 7, Admiral Way watched the broadcast with his last breath. He was surrounded by the children and of those he had saved during the burning. They held his hands as his old heart finally stopped. He died smiling. In the months that followed, the galaxy transformed. The hegemony's rigid structure was dismantled. Former enemies became reluctant partners. Human engineers worked alongside scientists. Human teachers shared their history with children. Slowly, carefully, a new civilization began to take shape. It was not perfect. There was suspicion and resentment and fear. Old wounds did not heal quickly, but it was a beginning. Admiral retired after 5 years. She found a small planet on the edge of known space, a world with blue oceans and green forests and skies that changed color at sunset. She built a small house there. She planted a garden. Sometimes visitors would come. Young humans who had grown up hearing stories of the ghost admiral. Old veterans who had fought beside her. Even aliens, now and then, curious about the woman who had chosen mercy over revenge. They always found her in the garden, working in the dirt, surrounded by flowers. "Why did you spare them?" a young officer asked her once. "After everything they did, how could you forgive?" Was quiet for a long time, looking at the sunset that painted the sky in orange and pink and purple. "I did not forgive them," she said finally. "I may never forgive them, but hatred is heavy. It wears you down. It turns you into something you do not want to be." She touched a flower, gentle and careful. "My grandmother told me that the measure of a species is not how it treats its friends. It is how it treats its enemies. We could have become destroyers. We could have spread the darkness that was forced on us. Instead, we chose to be human." She smiled, and for a moment she looked like the young girl who had first seen a warship being built in the depths of an asteroid. The galaxy expected silence from us. We gave them something louder. We gave them hope. Above them the stars were coming out, thousands of them, millions, an entire galaxy that had once tried to destroy humanity. Now it was learning to grow with them. And somewhere, on a small planet circling a distant sun, new children were being born, children who would never know the darkness of hidden tunnels or the fear of extinction, children who would grow up under open skies, telling stories of their ancestors who had emerged from silence to shake the stars. The story of humanity was not over. It was only beginning.